What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So UFC 297 was literally not being discussed, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of drama around the card, mostly fueled by Ariel Helwani and Ali Abdelaziz. You know, Helwani came out earlier today and said that it looks like Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev 2 is going to take the place of what was to be Ilia Topuria and Volkanovski. For obvious reasons, Alexander Volkanovski suffered a TKO loss to Islam Makhachev just recently, so they have to move that fight 1 month, and they're sort of looking towards February, which makes the Toronto card wide open as far as a main event is concerned. And so no sooner that Ariel announced that, Ali came out and said, this is fake news. This is not going to happen. Islam is not able to fight until at least March 9th, that third pay-per-view card of the year. What do you make of all this, and do you think that Oliveira versus Makhachev 2 will happen in January?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen. And when I first saw this picture get put out of Islam and Charles in the same, UFC poster, I'm like, oh, here we go again. We're going to have Charles Oliveira do something that he doesn't want to do, and Islam Makhachev is going to have to go in there on a quick turnaround and just take somebody out once again. And I think Islam's starting to get to that point where he's like where Israel Adesanya was, where like, I just want some fresh blood. I don't really want to keep fighting Volkanovski, and I don't really want to keep fighting Charles. I will if nobody else is willing to insert their name and start to, cause a stir in the division and give me something to look forward to. But I really don't think Charles Oliveira is the right next move for Islam, and Ali Abdelaziz is probably one of the most well put together managers in all of sports. I'll say combat sports, but probably all of sports. He seems to have really good options and answers for all of his fighters, and a lot of his fighters have gone on to do amazing things in the UFC. A lot of them have gotten the belt, and some of them even still have the belt today. So I think his move is actually more of a champ move. I think he wants to see Islam Makhachev hold out, see what happens between Leon Edwards and Colby Covington, and then make his shot up there. Because unless that is the fight of the year and, has everybody just clamoring to see an instant rematch, I don't really see the UFC doing a Leon Edwards versus Colby, rematch or potential trilogy. I just think that there's too many great fighters at the top of 170, and there's so many undefeated big prospects and undefeated new names that have really emerged lately that we don't need to hold this division up anymore. Welterweight is really hot. Let's get a bunch of different names in there and see who the baddest man on the planet is. Whether it's Leon or Colby is to be determined, but after that, I think we're going to see a real revolving door with that belt. The only thing that would slow down all those top prospects, and when I'm talking about them, I'm talking Rakhmonov, Ian Gary, Sean Brady, Bilal Muhammad, all of those guys would take a back seat if Islam Makhachev decided to go for champ status. I think Ali Abdelaziz knows that. I think Islam knows that, and it would be a wise move for them to wait and see what happens after this pay-per-view card towards the end of the year to see if Islam fits in right there at 170. And I believe he actually matches up really well against both of those guys, and that would be maybe the easiest challenge for him to get a belt at 170.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a can-kicking exercise to me, because I don't know why Ali would say Islam's not ready to fight until March 9th. He took no damage against Volkanovski. He got him out of there in the first round and literally barely got touched the entire time. So he could have turned around and fought the next weekend if he wanted to. And so I think you're exactly right. I think this is a game here in which they're trying to see they don't want to commit to anything in January until they see what happens in December with Colby and Leon. And I understand Bilal Muhammad. That guy deserves a shot more than anybody. Shavkat Rakhmonov. I mean, how is it possible to get any better than perfect with a 100% finish rate? Right. That guy's going to get his shot at some point. But Islam Makhachev is one of the biggest stars in the sport right now.
Right.
The UFC does want to see what he can do as far as star power. We do know that Khabib was one half of the biggest pay-per-view that the UFC ever had, and Islam Makhachev is not to that level yet, but he's starting to crawl his way up there and become a mega star, especially in certain parts of the world. So I think that Ali is going to try to hold out as best he can until after the last pay-per-view of the year, see what happens, and see if they can pine for a March fight for the 170 title. It's either that or they're just going to look for like a Justin Gaethje. I don't think the Makhachev camp wants the Oliveira fight.
No.
Just like I really don't think that Charles would prefer to fight Islam. I think Charles would be content hanging around. Maybe when Conor McGregor comes back, he welcomes him back to the division, or maybe he goes up to 170 and fights Conor there. Or, there's all kinds of stuff that could happen. But to me, it feels like almost the proverbial trying to stick a square peg into a round hole when it comes to Oliveira versus Makhachev. I just don't feel like either camp wants the fight. And so Ariel is usually spot on. He doesn't usually post news until he's verified it several times from several different sources. And usually when he posts it, the UFC or another credible source will come out and say, yes, it is actually confirmed. This case was a little bit different. It was almost immediate. As soon as he said it's all but done, everybody else on the Makhachev camp and a couple of other of the MMA sites came out and said, not so fast. This fight is not happening.
Yeah, Ariel has gotten in a lot of trouble doing that sort of stuff. But, usually when he breaks some sort of news like that or drops a rumor, it ends up coming to fruition, even if the UFC wanted to keep it under wraps, or maybe the manager in that position wanted to keep it under wraps until the time was right to really start to promote it on their own. Ariel has ruffled a lot of feathers in his career doing that, but that's also kind of what makes him who he is. He gets the crazy interviews. He's willing to say whatever to the fighters, to their managers, to the other
Chael Sonnen recently.
Yeah, to the other talking heads in the sport. And I really think Ariel Helwani has some sort of insight whenever it comes to any of these types of topics, and you have to take his word with some sort of weight regardless of what he's saying. And when you say something like Charles Oliveira versus Islam is going to fight each other, that doesn't sound like a lofty thing that just couldn't possibly be happening. For me, I hope that does not happen. And another thing that sticks out to me with Islam Makhachev going up to 170, and the reason I'm so bullish on that, and I really do think that's the direction they're going to go, is this year has been a very life-changing year for the UFC. And when I say that, I mean there's not that many stars right now. John Jones just got hurt, so now he's out. He's one of the biggest, names in the entire sport, and he's one of the most dominant fighters we've ever seen. And now that he's at heavyweight, there's some even more weight to his fights. But we've got at least 6 months, 8 months until we're going to see him again. Israel Adesanya just suffered a bad loss, and he came out a couple weeks ago and said he's not fighting again until 2027, which seems really far away. But remember, we're in 2023, about to hit 2024. So that's not all that far if you think about how active he's been, and then a guy that's done everything in the sport might just want to take a few years off. So now you're looking at, okay, well, who are our champions? We don't really have any megastars. Volkanovski, of course, is a monster, but he's not a huge pay-per-view draw. Sugar Sean O'Malley is an undeniable star, and people know him on the mainstream. People know him that are casuals, but he's not pulling in the pay-per-view numbers that they need him to. And that's when all the attention sort of pushes back onto Islam Makhachev. If Islam can go up and get another belt, and he can be a champ, and he can run 2 divisions at once, that's going to push him up into another stratosphere. And I believe if Islam Makhachev does go up to 170, he'll likely be the favorite against Leon Edwards or Colby Covington, which gives him a really good chance of winning that fight. Stylistically, I just think he matches up against both of them well. And if he's able to go in there and finish them like he's been able to finish a lot of people lately, I think that you've got a mega star on your hands, and I think he'd be having to do a lot of the heavy lifting as far as pay-per-views go for the UFC, up until they can find somebody else. Maybe a Conor McGregor can insert himself back in, and they can, rely on him to sell some pay-per-view tickets. But it seems to me like there's not that many stars in the UFC sky right now, and they're looking to, really attach to somebody that's dominant, that's got the skills, and has the ability to grow a wide fan base. And Islam just seems like the hottest candidate for that.
Yeah, I talk a lot on this channel, as do you, about the star power of Islam Makhachev. And a lot of people push back and say, hey, he's a boring fighter. He doesn't really get these great finishes, and he'll hold you down. And just the normal stuff you get, the nonsense that people say in response to not being fans of Islam Makhachev.
Right.
And I would just push back and say, who right now in the UFC that's a champion is pulling 1 million or more pay-per-view buys? Now, Islam's not going to do that on every fight.
Yeah.
But when you look forward to 2024, what potential matchups could pull more than 1 million pay-per-view buys? Short of Conor coming back, there really isn't much on the schedule.
Nothing.
And as you said, Sugar Sean, he's a star in his own right, but that has not translated over yet into mega pay-per-view buys. I think him and Aljo did what, like 500,000?
Less than 400,000, which is not great.
Not great. So don't think for one second that they won't consider, especially if it's Colby. If Colby beats Leon Edwards, Islam Makhachev versus Colby Covington, and all of the media and the antics and the trash talk that would come from Colby for that fight has the potential to sell more than 1 million pay-per-views. And with John out, with Francis gone, with Conor, being in the wind about what's happening, is he not fighting right now? They need a 1 million plus pay-per-view card in 2024, and that fight, Colby versus Islam, would probably do it. And so for that reason, I think they're going to hold out. I don't think they're going to, and Islam just fought, so it's not like you said, they're not pining for some news to come out with Islam. He literally just fought on the last pay-per-view, so he doesn't owe us a new date right now.
Right.
He can wait comfortably until after December and nobody will complain about it. So I think Ali's a smart manager. He's doing the right thing and coming out and combating this. And I think personally that January card is going to be filled with Sugar Sean. I think it's going to be Chito Vera versus O'Malley. It makes sense. The fight's in Toronto. We know that Sugar has an established relationship with the Nelk boys and Kyle, and those guys are very tied into the UFC right now. Toronto is Kyle's hometown.
Yeah.
It seems like that would be a big homecoming, the happy dad parties. That to me feels like an O'Malley at the top of the bill sort of card.
Yeah, and O'Malley versus Chito Vera is a compelling matchup. We know that they fought before, but everybody saw it was a controversial finish. And Chito Vera, while looking good in that fight, I think he was a step behind Sugar until he was able to injure Sugar to a point where he couldn't compete. Sugar Sean O'Malley has gotten so much better in this short amount of time since they fought each other. And while Cheeto's made improvements as well, none of them have been as drastic as Sugar Sean's. I really think with Izzy not being active right now, Sugar Sean O'Malley is the highest level striker that the UFC has on its roster. And if he's able to get back in there and get in with Chito Vera, of course, he's got to be a little bit more durable, but I have a feeling he's going to have a field day with Chito. He's going to pick him apart, make it look relatively easy, and that's exactly what the UFC needs out of Sugar. They can't afford to have him lose the belt, and that's why you don't want to have him go in there against Aljo again. Who knows what happens if Aljo does get a hold of him? Who knows if Sandhagen? That's an awful matchup because they're both such dynamic strikers. Anything can happen when you're throwing that heavy with that much explosive.
Nurmagomedov.
Nurmagomedov, right.
DeWallish Willie.
Chito Vera's the right guy. Let's just say that. Yeah. Sugar Sean O'Malley has nothing but hard fights ahead of him, but I would say of all the hard fights ahead of him, Chito Vera might be the easiest one. And then another point, the last point I'll make about the Islam Makhachev thing, and you said he just fought on the last pay-per-view, so why are we already looking to him? That's another sign as to what I was saying earlier. There's no stars right now. Everybody's looking. Who's going to main event these pay-per-views? We've got the women's 135 belt, which is, going to be so non-competitive and so uninteresting that feels like it should be a fight night, just like Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso. It just seems like there's a real shuffling of the deck at all divisions right now, and we got to keep a couple of stars in the sky so we can have some sort of things to look forward to and some big cards that the UFC can rely on. Islam Makhachev versus Colby would do really well. And that's why I always keep referring back to if Conor McGregor can get his hand raised against anybody that can fog a mirror on the UFC's roster, he will get a shot against Islam Makhachev because right now they're just hurting for big numbers.
No doubt.